Welcome back to the channel, ladies and gentlemen. I hope you have had a wonderful few days. As you can see, the background behind me is quite different. That's because I'm currently in a hotel lobby in Rome. And saying that, it is currently 3 a.m. in the morning, and as such, I'm not really trying to wake everyone in the hotel up. So I've adjusted the audio gain, output gain, so that it's a little bit higher, and I'll probably be talking a little bit quieter with a little bit less energy than usual, but the rest of the video should still be the same. Today, I have for you covered the best assistant manager for GameWeek 26, as many of us look to potentially transfer out Emery or Arnie Slot, as well as looking at the best captain for GameWeek 26 and Cody Gakpo and some of the cheaper midfielders as requested. Very much looking forward to getting into this one. So before we do, if you could press the like button, I would be greatly appreciate it. 450 likes is the target, as is 7,000 subscribers. But without anything else needing to be said, let's hop into it. It's felt like such a long time since I was able to do this section in any sense of depth that I've completely forgot the last time I did it. But nonetheless, I am back with what is usually my favorite section of the video, and that is captaincy. Albeit when you get to the assistant manager section, you may be in for a surprise. So let's look at the three primary captaincy candidates and whether I think there could be an opportunity to go against De Bruyne and go against Mohamed Salah. And as you can tell by the first sentence, the answer to that question is yes. Mohamed Salah versus Manchester City away, Ollie Watkins versus Chelsea at home, and Mbeumo / Wissa versus Leicester City away. Before I get onto the 3/4 primary candidates, a couple of necessary mentions. Firstly, Alexander Isak. I've seen some people go for him. I've seen him be in the top 3 for polls as well. I understand the temptation, especially given the quality of player. However, in this particular spot, when you look at the other contenders for the captaincy, I personally just think that the Nottingham Forest fixture is probably the hardest one in terms of generating attacking returns. Secondly, he's a forward, so I would really want him to be able to realistically generate 3 returns. I just think that against the Forest side, especially if they have even a decent day, from a defensive standpoint, they're too good to really let that happen. And Newcastle are coming off the back of a poor performance against Manchester City, and whilst I shouldn't have too much of a bearing, if Joe Linton's not there, you could see a potentially slightly worse performance than you maybe would expect with him, significantly worse performance you would expect with him. So that's the reason that I personally am not going Isak. I think it's the hardest fixture, and he's a forward. And then secondly, I really did, as you could imagine, given some of the moves I have made. But given what I've seen so far, I think whilst the upside is there, it's not anywhere close to being secure. And considering the risk profile, especially for my team when it comes to making this move, I imagine a lot of yours as well. It's not like free transfers are there in abundance for most of us. Some of us will have to take hits. It's a slightly awkward spot in terms of who do you sell. It's difficult to justify a Palmer sell given his fixtures in 27 and 28. I just thought it was really, really difficult for me to justify the risk profile for the reward. And as such, I very likely won't be doing it nor bringing him in. Firstly, let's look at what is the most like-for-like contender when it comes to Mohamed Salah, and that is Bryan Mbeumo. Firstly and foremost, he's a midfielder. And that's great because as we've discussed on this channel, that increases both your floor and your ceiling. 1 extra point for a goal and 1 extra point for a clean sheet, which a forward is simply not able to access. Secondly, let's look at him individually and his routes to points. Well, he's got set pieces, but not just corners, right? He's also got direct and indirect free kicks, got routes to goals and assists in that form. He's also got the ability to cross very well at a variety of different angles from that right-hand side. So those are almost methods of returning within methods of returning. He's also got the ability to shoot and shoot well from different angles. He's got good ball striking. He's got good ability to run in behind, but also drop slightly deeper and create some space for himself between him and his man and get a shot off like that. He's got so many routes to points, realistic routes to points, and I think that's wonderful, at least for your floor, if not ceiling as well. Secondly, looking at the two teams, I think Leicester are certainly a team that is better when the game is slightly slower and they can set themselves up in that deep block a little bit like they did against Arsenal, make themselves difficult to beat. But Brentford have a wonderful way of inviting you into a faster paced game, which we noticed especially in the first half against West Ham, who is someone who in general much prefer to employ a slower game model and usually utilize something along those lines. So I would say that in itself is another method to potentially generate returns. Thirdly, he's so dangerous on transition, and so are Brentford, right? Especially with him and Sharda and Wissa and Damsgaard as well. Even Lewis Potter. And then fourthly, like you look at the firepower that I've just mentioned and the quality that is there. And with all due respect to Leicester, probably not the best defensive outfit in the league. And as such, with that type of quality, you're always in for a chance when you play a defense like Leicester's, again, with the utmost respect. And then fifth, it's difficult to say he is a flat track bully because I don't really like using that phrase this season. Whilst I said that Leicester aren't the best defence in the league, and I think that's more of a fact than an opinion, I still don't think they're anywhere close to just being a rollover and this just being a slam dunk. Like, yeah, Brentford are going to go there, win 3-4-0, and he's just going to perform really well. And that's why I wouldn't really describe this as a flat track. But against the sides who are lower down in the table, he's done very, very, very well and has done so for a while. So I think that is another good reason as to why you could potentially go here. In terms of like his positioning, because I think with wingers especially, we don't really want them too wide. I think whilst he's probably playing a slightly wider role with Kevin Schade in the side, he's still venturing into the half spaces enough whereby I think to justify a captaincy, absolutely okay. On the flip side, the conditions of the game aren't great. Let's had a good performance versus Arsenal. It's Friday night football, and I think when the game is televised, the atmosphere is always a little bit better. It's under the lights. I think that helps with the atmosphere as well. And I think Brentford have some inconsistencies within their performances over a season compared to some of the other sides that you rate highly, right? Because, for example, you'll rate a side like Newcastle highly, but I don't think they're as inconsistent as Brentford. And I think we need to always remember that they are like 10th, 11th, up in and around that spot in the league for a reason. Great side in their own right, and they have a lot of quality and a brilliant manager and some brilliant players, but they're not like Liverpool, right? And I think we have to account for these type of games potentially going the other way more so than we do with the likes of Liverpool. But all of the reasons previously discussed, I quite like it. And whether I have him in second or third, I'm not entirely sure when it comes to Salah, but I think it's more than justifiable to go here, especially when you take the strategic aspect into account, which we'll come on to in the next slide and the slide after that. In terms of Wissa, I think it's justifiable for all of the reasons I discussed with the conviction, as long as you have strong conviction. He's been getting a lot of chances recently, largely being point dodging. Obviously, 2 disallowed goals against West Ham. On another day, it walks off the race. Likewise, against Spurs and in fixtures won by Pryor. But honestly, I wouldn't be surprised if you got 3 returns. I just personally wouldn't, because he's a forward. The score slightly lower, your ceiling slightly lower, and I just don't trust him as much as maybe I do Mohamed Salah or Ollie Watkins. Then we move on to what I will say will be the people's choice and what will undoubtedly be the most captain man when it comes to game 26, and that is Mohamed Salah. I think we'll learn a lot from the Liverpool game, and we can take certain things that we learn and certain variables and apply that to our projections for the Manchester City game, including Liverpool's physical condition, how tired did they personally look after whatever type of game they experience, their ability to deal with transitions, because Villa have obviously got Rodgers, Watkins, and Rashford in particular, and City have obviously got great transitional weapons as well, so how they're able to deal with that, especially away from home. Momentum, obviously they lost against Plymouth, then they drew at Everton, especially in the fashion they did. I didn't think the performance against Wolves was particularly great, especially in the second half. Wolves had them on the ropes a little bit as well. So they are to drop points here. How does the momentum come into it and that factor? And just generally a mental state as well. Obviously, it's a long season. They got a lot of games. If they don't get a win at Villa, maybe they look a little bit off it, maybe the pressure gets to them, etc., etc., right? So I think these are all things that we can take from the game on Wednesday night and apply them to our captaincy. Secondly, I think Nico Gonzalez is a big deal. I had never even heard of him, to be quite honest with you, before his move, but I was impressed from what I saw against Newcastle. I think having a physical specimen like that is really what City needed in the midfield. And as such, I don't think they'll concede as many transitions, and I don't think they will be as threatening in terms of the transitions they do concede. And they've got some of their defenders back, including Ruben Dias, which is a big, big, big deal. But they'll still concede them, and Liverpool will still probably hurt them in those moments at least once. Whether it results in a goal is not what I'm talking about, but I think they'll hurt them in some sense, because they are absolutely devastating and they've got the players to do that. Even if like Trent long balls or the Boslai's carrying power or Salah just being the best player in the Premier League, that's a huge, huge, huge aspect of the game, and where Salah could certainly kill them. But I just do think that at this particular stage, what we see now, there'll be a slightly reduced frequency and quality. And then obviously, like, you look at Salah, right? He's in the form of his life. He's the best player in the league. Liverpool probably the best team in the country at the moment. He's the best Big Six game player of all time. It's not like City going to see it in a like really deep 5-4-1, which is, I would say, has probably been his kryptonite so far this season, right? You're going to have a set of conditions which aren't exactly unideal for him. And as such, like, there are all the good things to say about him and this captaincy. However, there is, of course, a strategic element, which we will come on to with the Watkins thing. But I also do think that you need to have some respect for Manchester City's quality. And I don't think they're anywhere near as bad of a patch as they were earlier on. And with Nico Gonzalez and having Ruben Dias back in particular, I think that's a big, big, big deal. And Guardiola's looked good to me recently. Like, I've watched a few of his games and he's looked a lot better than maybe he did in some shaky points early in the season. And as such, he might be able to have a good day against him. And also, it's away as well, so I think that'll play into it. But all of those things to consider when it comes to captaincy. Currently, I've got him second. You might be able to guess who I've got first, given what I showed you earlier on. Now, is this a strategic decision? Well, there's a huge element of that to this. There have been times in the past where I've backed against Salah or the most popular captaincy choice, and I've genuinely just thought that others were better. For example, Saka against West Ham away is a good example. But this time around, it's more strategic than that was, at least. I think about 85% plus of engaged managers for Captain Mohamed Salah. And not only that, only about 25% of those own, or of the whole field of engaged managers own Ollie Watkins. And as such, if he hits and he hauls, he'll get the points for the haul, but also in a double sense, because they're not going to have the downside protection. They won't own him, at least 75% of the field. Whereas if Salah hauls, at least it's only going to be, the downside's only going to be whatever he does pick up as an individual asset, as opposed to your captain. So I think that works really well. Unless Watkins is acting as a blocker for a brilliant forward, who you think is also going to do really well that other people own. But in general, I don't think there's a single forward asset who's got a brilliant fixture this week, who's highly owned, that you're not going to own Watkins, right? Because you probably own Eve as well, who we will come on to later in the video. Now, I know that's not the case for some of you, but for most of you, that will be. So I think in that sense, I quite like it. Downside protection, which I always talk about when making these type of moves, it's not essential. I just think it's preferable, and preferable in some cases, unless you want to access even more upside, then not a great thing. But the upside is certainly there. Now, matchup-wise, I think this is the type of game where Ollie Watkins would haul. As expressed previously, in a game like this, you want players who are good in transition. And you've got Rodgers, you've got Watkins, and you've got Rashford. And that is a lot of firepower to take to a game where they will certainly be present. In general, with the way that we're playing at the moment, I think there's a little bit too much space on offer as well. Certain parts of the pitch and certain moments resulting of certain patterns of play, I think they're well set to exploit this. I think the fact that it's at Villa Park, I think the fact that you've got players with the personality like Rodgers who really seem like they'll rise to the occasion. Even Rashford, this will be a game he's probably looking at as a way to kind of impose himself back on the Premier League, and the fact that it's at home, so he'll have the crowd behind him as well. So I think that's all quite a big deal. Then going back to a bit of more tactical talk, I think our lack of attacking penetration at the moment, and the fact that we're really struggling to just create chances without Jackson, the fact that he was our best transitional weapon against these type of teams, the fact that we've got injuries as well, for example, Wake went off, and you probably want him in this type of game ahead of Sancho. I don't think it's overly necessary to have an associative type of winger. I don't think that helps. And the lack of attacking penetration, I think, will just indirectly lead to more pressure absorption. And I say it's mental there as well, because I think just having to face waves and waves of pressure means that at some point your focus be lost slightly just through fatigue, and they could profit from that as well. And then in the middle, I think we're slightly over-reliant on Caicedo defensively. For example, even if Cucurella inverts and we have a diamond in the middle, I think there's just a lot of weight put on Caicedo to have a huge dueling capacity within the game. Obviously, you've got it as a playable, but within the game, and I don't think that's so good. One thing that I remember from the Chelsea-Villa game, the reverse fixture, is that whenever Rodgers was in the central spaces and came deep to receive the ball, Cole would follow him all the way. I feel like at Villa Park, though, that type of dynamic, that aggressive type of dynamic, is more susceptible to going wrong. And I wouldn't be surprised if at one point Rodgers just takes him on the half time. And when he does, especially given Lavia won't be there and the same sense of protection won't be there, and we've got injuries in the right centre back role as well, I think he could hurt us there. And then just in general, like I spoke about with the space and transitions, I think Villa can hurt us there. So all of those reasons, I quite fancy Ollie Watkins to do quite well against us. And as of now, that's where I'm on. Like I said, more so strategic than footballing, but there's obviously that element there. Otherwise, I wouldn't be doing it. And now we move on to the other big topic of the week, the assistant manager analysis. I think there are essentially three routes you can go down. One, you choose a table bonus manager, which we will come on to. Two, you stick with Unai Emery, which we will come on to. And thirdly, you go for your favorite. So let's say, for example, you look at Arsenal West Ham, you think that is the best fixture of the week for any particular manager, and you go Arteta. For me, if I had to pick one of the favorites, out of that group, I would go Fabian Hertzler, but I don't even like it that much. I don't necessarily trust Brighton in the games. I still think they're going to win, and I could see them winning quite big, but I still don't trust them massively in these type of games. And obviously, he doesn't have table bonus as well. So personally, for me, I'm not going with option number 3, but if you were to do so, that will be your preferred option out of 3. Let's look at 2, and then we'll look at one more in depth, sticking with Unai Emery. And this currently is my second favorite choice. That's currently my second favorite choice. out of not only the three, but there's only one candidate above Unai Emery as well. If you have a similar interpretation of how Aston Villa versus Chelsea will go in terms of the positive view on Villa, as you would have seen in the Ollie Watkins discussion, then it's a really good move, honestly, to keep him. Because let's just assume you win 6 points, and we'll just go 2-1. That's 8 points. But you'll have also saved a transfer, right? That hidden value of saving a transfer, we'll just call that 4 points because that's how much it is for a hit, especially with having to move people out for blank game at 29. That might come even more in handy because you're almost certain to take a hit if you don't do this. And as such, let's just call it a 12 point, right? But if you had the interpretation I did, it could realistically be a 2-0 win or a 3-1 win. So we'll go to 9 points, add 4, and that makes it 13. Realistically, I'd say if you win with table bonus, it's around 18, 19. So you're losing roughly like 6 points, right? On the assumption that the other table bonus manager you were going to go for wins, but you're massively reducing your risk profile. And there's obviously no guarantee of that as well. So for all of those reasons, I think sticking with Unai Emery is actually quite a sound strategy and have no real issues with it at all. Now, here are the candidates for table bonus this particular game week. Ruud van Nistelrooy versus Brentford, Potter versus Arsenal, Pereira versus Bournemouth, Glasner versus Fulham, on the assumption that Aston Villa do not win versus Liverpool. Otherwise, table bonus will not be present for this fixture, hence the asterisk next to it. And Kieran McKenna versus Spurs and Juric versus Brighton. When I thought about all of these guys, what I realized is that aside from Glasner and Potter, only really one of them. If I was to go anywhere else, I really would just be gambling. I think I looked at I did look at projections for the bookies odds for Leicester versus Brentford and just in general, and they had it at about, I think, 28% for Ruud van Nistelrooy to win. Right, but for me, because I don't have strong conviction in them winning, especially compared to how I used to when I initially formulated this assistant manager plan, I would basically be taking a roulette wheel, having 30% of it green, 70% red, wherever it falls right. What I want is strong conviction. So if the bookies say 30%, realistically, I think it's 40%, and I've given myself an edge, and I'm more than happy, therefore, to take it on. Ruud van Nistelrooy, I don't like it for the reasons I discussed in the Brian Mbeumo captaincy section. Kieran McKenna, I know some people like this and they don't trust Spurs at the moment, and Ipswich at home. And against a Spurs defence, that always gives you an opportunity when they come up against Liam Delap and Amari Hutchinson in particular, and even Leif Davis down the left flank. Ipswich can hurt them. But for me, I think with the quality that Spurs have, with Tell in the team as well at 9, just functioning a little bit better than some of the others have done this season, for my own interpretation at least, I personally think that it's not the one to go for. Juric, it's an interesting one because I've expressed how I don't really trust Brighton against these lower sides, and they've gone through patches where they've dropped points against teams they wouldn't have expected to, especially when they were flying high. But with Southampton's playing style being so different compared to most teams who are down at that rough position in the league, I don't think that necessarily interacts with Brighton's too well from their standpoint, and hence why I said that Hertzler was my favourite, if anyone was. And then Vitor Pereira, I did give this strong consideration, as I did to all of these. And I can see it working because I can see a side like Bournemouth who rely on a lot of long balls to create chances and then scrapping for the second ball and their high press and transitions, not really getting too much change out of a Wolves side who don't really give you the conditions in which to thrive in those particular aspects. So that is why I say it is slightly more feeling oriented. So if you wanted to go there, I don't think it's a bad decision. But for me, personally, it just feels a little bit off. I think Bournemouth are in good form. Also a little bit of an unlucky side. It's away from home. And yeah, I just don't particularly trust it. That's why I said, even though the footballing conditions I think are okay to go for it from a feeling perspective, it just doesn't feel good. So I'm not going to go there. Now we can move on to some of the others. Let's move on to Oliver Glasner, who seems to be the people's favourite for all of those favouring table bonus this game week on the assumption he gets it. But for me, personally, I don't like it so much. I think Palace are in a little bit of an awkward spot at the moment. I think two of their better players, two of their best players, Eze and Wharton, neither are fit at the moment. They're not fully fit. At least you can't expect them to see 90. And even when they play, they're not within the rhythm that they would like, I would say. So for those reasons, I think that's negative for Crystal Palace. I think if you look at how Crystal Palace interacted with that Everton defensive block, one of the more physical and well-structured defensive blocks in the league, and how Fulham have similar traits to that. For example, Fulham is very physical, arguably even more so, and generally just more physical on the pitch, and have a very compact, well-coached block as well. It's more of a mid-block than a deep block, but I guess sometimes they'll go into that. I can see Palace struggling to penetrate them to an extent. And Fulham, not only are they at home, but they're coming off a seriously good performance against Forest. And if you just score the scoreline, you think, oh, they just kind of like edged them to the game. But it wasn't like that. They genuinely could have had like 5-6 goals. And it could have been like another repeat of the Bournemouth game. I think you take that Chris Wood goal away, that moment of brilliance. Honestly, the assist was so good for that. I didn't get any credit. The assist the Gibbs White assist for that was so good, right? But you take that away, and Fulham are a little bit more clinical on the day. Honestly, that's another repeat of the Bournemouth game. So, yeah, I think it is a very tough task to go and ask them there to perform, especially when Eze and Wharton aren't as fit as they would like. And then on the next slide, you see why I don't like Mikel Arteta so much. What I was going to say when I mispronounced Mikel's first name is that Glasner's still my second favourite choice out of the table bonus managers. Obviously, Palace still have some quality, and Eze and Wharton will still be there whilst not being fully fit. They've got a very informed Mateta, etc. But for me, I think that Fulham have just got a little bit too much, and I don't really fancy betting against them at the moment. Firstly, I'm aware that you probably don't like this. And secondly, I'm aware that Arsenal are not only the favourites within this game, but also out of any matchup in the Premier League this week. However, it is my opinion, and whilst I appreciate you may not like it, I do encourage you to listen to it with an open mind. And then by all means, if you don't like it, do as you please. It is your team after all. So here's why I'm potentially going for Graham Potter, and he's currently my number one choice. Firstly, when you look at all the other options, Unai Emery aside, that I've discussed, and obviously not Mikel Arteta, because I don't want to go for that type of strategy, right? I think it's the greatest prospect for him, given this. I'm not particularly confident any of them winning, or don't really have any sense of conviction that they are going to go on. Of course they could, but I just don't think they will. Whereas with West Ham, I could genuinely see it happening on Saturday. And as such, I'm considering going here, and this is currently my most likely choice. So why? Well, my expectation is that they go to a back five, and I think given the players that they have in their squad, they are far, far, far better suited to utilising a back five, primarily due to the fact that they lack a certain type of physical profile to play as a six, someone who's a destroyer, someone to break up those transitions, someone not only to help with retention and build up so they concede less transitions, but also just to act as someone with huge dueling capacity. Think Newcastle's midfield to an extent, right? They don't have anyone even close to that, right? Or at least to the extent that I think they should. So for me, there's a huge reason why I think they would do better with a back five, because this issue becomes less prevalent with this system. Secondly, and to a lesser extent, Emerson, I think he functions quite well as a left wing back. And thirdly, I think given Kudus and Bowen's qualities, I think they're quite suitable to functioning as inside forwards, and then hopefully having Evan Ferguson up top to accompany. I think the best way to hurt West Ham, for example, you think about West Ham Liverpool when Liverpool won 5-0, I think the best way to hurt them is in transition and when the game is played at a higher tempo and faster tempo, and when there's more space available. And I think that's just unlikely to happen when West Ham set up in a back five compared to a back four. I also don't think that Arsenal's team is set up currently to really exploit this. For example, you think of Saka, you think of Nelly, you think of Hughes, you think of Havertz, you think those transition weapons all gone. Whereas someone like Odegaard, even Marino in the middle, because I expect him to start. Trossard to an extent. I have nothing negative to say about Ethan. I mean, obviously, such a good performance against Leicester, clearly a very good player, so I don't think that's an issue for them at all. But I think in other spots, they're certainly a little bit weaker than you would like. So I think when West Ham get in that deeper, more settled block, I'm not necessarily sure that Arsenal have got the best dynamics to exploit that either. I personally don't like Rice's usage at the moment with how high he is on the left-hand side. I don't think Trossard is the best in this type of situation, especially when you consider that like 1v1, it'll be him versus Wan-Bissaka. I can really see Wan-Bissaka getting the best of him. Odegaard's not been particularly influential, even against these blocks, to the extent that you would have liked. And as the league increases in physicality, I don't think he's as adapted as well as others have, and that makes sense, right? Given the type of physical profile he is. Look, obviously they have a lot of quality, Arsenal. They've got a lot of quality, and they've got more quality than West Ham. However, I think there is enough here for those reasons, whereby I don't think that Arsenal are just going to blow them away and they're going to put 5 or 6 past them. And then some of the other things just go into the individual quality that West Ham have. Kudus, Paquetá, Bowen, and Ferguson, as three of those will be the front four, mainly between Paquetá and Ferguson. That type of attacking quality can hurt anyone in Europe, right? So I think as long as the defense has a good game, that type of attacking quality, you give it a platform to have the volume of attacks that are even somewhat healthy within the game, I think they can hurt Arsenal. I really do. And then secondly, they've got a goalkeeper that whilst he has a mistake in him, he's also got the capacity to have like a freakishly good game. I think in these type of games, you need to have a goalkeeper who can do that right, unlike some of the others that we've maybe seen in the league this season. And then obviously the strategic element comes into it. And for those reasons, I'm quite likely to be going Graham Potter. Now, I know you won't like this, most of you. I know that, for example, you may disagree with some of the analysis. You may think that Arsenal have just got too much for them, and that's fair enough. But for me, for all of these reasons, I think it's far better than the bookies suggest. And if I don't like it, by the time we come to Friday, because obviously it's a Friday deadline, I can very well just save the transfer and go Unai Emery, or who knows, maybe my perception of another manager will change. But as of now, I am actually going to go Graham Potter. Talking about Nwaneri, let's talk about him here as well as some of the other cheaper midfielders. And we'll start with Morgan Rogers because this is someone who's about 70% effective ownership at the moment, especially given the double game week. And a lot of people are considering selling. But why are they considering selling? One, the lack of output in recent times, but also two, doesn't have the best fixtures, you could argue, but mainly the blank gaming in 29 and just moving on to someone who's got better prospects in the short term, but also longer term as a result. And people are considering Bournemouth midfielders and Nwaneri. First, I think we really need to assess whether Rodgers is a sell. I think in terms of the performances, they're absolutely fine. There's no issue there. I think he's still been in good form, even though the output in the Premier League hasn't shown that. He's still been returning quite heavily in other competitions, including the FA Cup and the Champions League, where he scored a hat-trick. And as such, I wouldn't say this is a solid, not so much a solid sell, but this is a hard sell, right? I think you can justify it as a solid sell, but it's not a hard sell, right? I think then we also must evaluate the opportunity cost of the Bournemouth mids and Nwaneri, which we'll come on to, and the likelihood of him actually turning these good performances into ones with output and thus FPL returns. Chelsea at home is a fixture I like for him, right? For all of the reasons that we've discussed prior in this video, I think this is his type of game, and I can see him returning and doing well. So I'm not overly keen on the prospect of selling him in game week 26 unless you have strong conviction in the asset that you're going for. I think even Palace away, Brentford away, I think Brentford away with the pace of the game, with the transitions, the carrying power that he has, I think that could be quite good. And then Palace away is one of those where I feel like, can I just go either way, right? But at least Chelsea at home, Brentford away, I think it's quite good for him. So I wouldn't say he's a strong sell, a solid sell, perhaps, though, given if you may interpret one of these to be particularly good, including the Bournemouth midfielders. Honestly, I really like all of them. I like Kluivert for all of the reasons discussed. I like Dango for all of the reasons previously discussed. And I like Semenyo more and more now, as I probably begin to appreciate that whilst the finishing still isn't there, it's still a very secure asset at the price and minutes and the fixtures coming up. And he's definitely got a better fixture on than I would say both of these guys. So if you wanted to move that, I'd say that's absolutely fine. Equally, though, if you have strong conviction in Rodgers or even medium this week and you want one more week to see how it goes, fine. I wouldn't say Bournemouth have the easiest fixture in 26th, from 27. And Nwaneri, personally, I wouldn't. I don't think saving the cash here is as important as it maybe has been in previous times this season or previous seasons, simply because of our squad structures. We can afford largely what we want. Naturally, the extra million will always help, but I don't think it's as important this time around. And personally, I just prefer the Bournemouth midfielders because I trust their goal threat a little bit more and thus their ceiling. But also, I just think they've got better fixtures. And for those reasons, I'm personally going to side with the Bournemouth midfielders if you are to make the move. I think it's quite subjective and circumstantial whether you do so or not. And yeah, that's about it. Mainly the Arsenal fixtures not being as good as Bournemouth, and likewise with his goal threat compared to the other three. Should you join our community, you will be the recipient of all of the benefits you can see on screen. Whether you become a platinum member and gain access to the exclusive WhatsApp community group, including exclusive football analysis, FPL help from so many brilliant managers, including the world number 5, the world number 20, people who are in the top 5k, people who are in the top 10k, people in the top 100k, people who are having huge rank rises, 1.3 million to 200k, for example, in a short space of time. All of that is on offer to yourself, and just in general, a very good group of people. Or if you would like the diamond tier, you can get all of that plus the 1-hour Q&A calls every single game week, which not only help you develop deeper relationships with people within that, I've already seen some of those brilliant relationships sprout, but also you essentially get a one-on-one with the fact that we just look at your team and we can plan it for future game weeks as well, whilst everyone else is there. So if that sounds good, then do consider trying it for at least 1 month and see how you go. If you don't like after a month, by all means cancel. But as I've said many times, I would say there's a minimum downside to this offer and maximum upside. Finally, to finish the last bit of analysis done in Rome, at least on video, should you be selling Cody Gakpo and Alexander Isak? Gakpo, I'm far more inclined to say yes, and just accept the fact that you won't have him for Southampton away. One thing I really don't like is it's sandwiched in between both of Liverpool's UCL round of 16 ties. So I think this is a potential opportunity to rest him, especially if it looks like the other guys and the guys who aren't necessarily first in command can get the job done. Good opportunity to give Jota and Nunes some minutes, especially after an international break. But you're not even guaranteed a start in the game you really want him for. So I think it makes it easier to spell. especially when you consider blank game week 29, game week 26, away at Manchester City, and the expected minutes probably won't be there, given he's coming back from injury. And yeah, game week 27 is okay. It's home to Newcastle. You look at someone like Cunha, he's just got better fixtures. Full stop, right? So for me, I'd just be moving on. I think it's unnecessary for him to take up so much money and such an important spot in your team when you're losing out on a lot of upside for someone like Matthias Cunha or someone else, should you have a strong conviction. Talking about strong conviction, should you be selling Alexander Isak? Well, I think you can if you have strong conviction, because if you look at it, blanks in 29 takes up a really valuable forward spot and a lot of money. So you could basically get to any forward on the assumption that you sell someone else to facilitate Haaland as well. Or maybe it's Marmoush that you prefer. But regardless, brilliant in that sense. And what else I would say is there's only 3 games left until we get to 20. So if you think that West Ham away, for example, in 28 is tough, if you think Forest go to Newcastle and put in a really good performance, then all of a sudden it becomes a lot more difficult to justify keeping him, especially when it's Liverpool sandwiched in the middle, which I think he could do quite well in. I think he could do quite well this week as well. And potentially against West Ham, depending on what system they use. I actually think West Ham are a little bit better away than home. But aside from that, if you disagree, I think genuinely a plausible sell. I personally wouldn't, but I think it's okay. And then in terms of the best replacement, I would say Cunha is just the most obvious one for obvious reasons. I mean, what a player. Ceiling, floor, fixtures, fixture in 29, routes to points, penalties. Right? I mean, it's just a slam dunk of an asset, and he's so cheap as well. Arteta free at 29 makes a lot of sense, just given the fixtures he's got either side. But if not, I think Wissa as well makes sense, but just not as much as Cunha. For me, he's miles in front, and I don't really want to overcomplicate it. He feels somewhat inevitable. I haven't owned him at any point this season, and every time I go against him, it feels like he's just damaged my rank. So yeah, I don't really want to overcomplicate this section. I think if you've got Gakpo, such an easy route into Matthias Cunha, who I think would do very well. I personally wouldn't sell Isak. I think it's an unnecessary risk. That's about it. And that is all she wrote for this video, ladies and gentlemen. And that concludes my recording session in Rome. It's got really late now, so I'm quite looking forward to going to sleep, waking up early, and then I'll be back the same day as you probably watch this. And I look forward to the Aston Villa versus Liverpool game tonight. I mean, expect potentially a huge swing if Villa win or get a result. Equally, if Arne Slot and Liverpool go on to win, then some of you will have had a magnificent game against those of us who went for Unai Emery. So it should all be very interesting. I'll go for a 3-2 Aston Villa prediction. You can leave yours in the comments below. Be interested to hear what you have to think about that. Yeah, that's about it. If you could drop a like on the video if you have enjoyed, 450 likes is the target. And similarly, for the thousands of you who have not subscribed, if you could click the subscribe button, I'd be greatly appreciative. Good luck for the Aston Villa versus Liverpool game, and I shall see you when I'm back in London on the other side.